Well, we've got the best of the best to talk a little politics this morning. Peggy Noonan, columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and now officially a CBS News consultant. And we're happy to have you, Peggy. And we're happy to also welcome New York Times national political correspondent Jonathan Martin, Mark Halperin, the managing editor now of Bloomberg Politics, and also a very popular author, plus Kim Strassel, also a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and Tavis Smiley, host of the Tavis Smiley Show on PBS and author of a new book, Death of a King. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we saw something last night we haven't seen during this campaign. The President of the United States went out and campaigned with a Democratic Senate candidate. I believe that's one in a row. And it probably tells us a little something about what this election's about. What would you say about that, Mark Halperin?
First and foremost, it's about the president. You know, they can say all they want. He's campaigned in some governor's races, but the Michigan Senate race is not why he was there. He was there for that governor's race, which is close. The president is spending right now, tomorrow, here in Washington, Tuesday, Election Day here in Washington, not doing political things. You imagine if Bill Clinton or even George Bush were in the White House, two guys who, one guy who loves politics, one who likes it a little bit less, they'd be out and about. The fact that the president isn't tells you what this election is about.
Even George W. Bush in '06 was out there more campaigning for House candidates, for example, where you haven't seen President Obama do that at all this year. So, look, there's no question that he is the central problem for Democrats this year. But what's interesting, Bob, is that while it's going to be a good night Tuesday for Republicans in the House and Senate, these governor's races are fascinating because I think you're going to see some Democrats actually do well in the governor's races.
You know, we say, and all the analysis right now is pointing to the Republicans taking control of the Senate, but that is based on the fact that there are 10 Senate races, some of which are within the margin of error. Each and every one of these races is very, very close. I would agree with most of the analysis. That's what I think is going to happen, but I'm also not betting any money this year on anything because, and with the polling the way it is right now, I'm not sure how much confidence I have in any of it.
We also have some big unknowns, which are Democrats are out there right now talking about how they're going to have the best ground game that they've ever had. They're going to have built on what they did in 2012 when they got it out and they got President Obama elected. But the Republicans have spent 2 years putting vast amounts of money into their own get out the vote operation. They brought in a bunch of guys from Silicon Valley. They redid and retooled all their data operations, and they're claiming they're going to have the best game that they have had ever in history. So it's going to be a big test on Tuesday. That's a huge unknown as well. Whose ground game is actually better? And it's an experiment.
Peggy, does this seem a little different than the normal midterm election?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. It feels to me like something is building, actually. It feels to me like there's sort of a fairly clear referendum on how people are feeling about maybe the past 2 years, maybe about the administration ever since the president was sworn in for the second time. I feel like things are building towards a certain outcome. I do think it's going to be a good night for the Republicans. I feel in some vivid way that is a little like the year 2006 for George Bush, that this election will function as a rebuke of the president.
Tavis Smiley, almost everybody you talk to says that in every race, in at least most of these races, a big black turnout is going to be key for the Democrats. But my sense is that President Obama may also have some problems with African Americans.
Well, Bill Clinton, who Jonathan referenced earlier, once famously said, as we all know, that elections are always about the future. They are, but how you feel about the future is linked to how you feel about the way you're being treated or mistreated in the present. And I said a couple of weeks ago on national television, I stand by it again today, 2 days in advance of these elections, that there is nothing to inspire African Americans to turn out in huge numbers, nothing to inspire Hispanics to turn out in huge numbers. When you have double the national unemployment average, you have double that inside the African American community, tripled in some sectors. There's a highway into poverty, but barely a sidewalk out. If you're Hispanic, you can't even get one of your central issues on the table, immigration reform. And they come to you as if you're sort of, how might I put this, election day first responders. They send out the SOS. We need you to come save us once again. I think that's disingenuous. I think it's disrespectful. I think it's demeaning. In North Carolina, you say that we want to move beyond race. We're in a post-racial America, and yet you played to the race card in North Carolina, in Louisiana, in Georgia. You can't win unless the black vote turns out for you. And in Kentucky, as was discussed earlier, you have a candidate there who 4 times in a matter of minutes wouldn't even admit to voting for Barack Obama. You want his loyal base to support you. You give the president the Heisman, but you want his constituents to vote for you. I mean, Peter only denied Jesus 3 times. This is a 4-time denial in a matter of minutes. But you want the black vote to come save you again. You want Hispanics to save you again. I'm not saying that blacks and browns ought to abandon the Democratic Party. What I'm saying is you got to hold them accountable, and maybe the lessons about what happens this year ought to start being reviewed now in advance of 2016.
The hard part for Democrats is that the states that are probably going to decide the majority happen to have a sizable amount of African Americans. Georgia, North Carolina, Louisiana, you could even include Arkansas in that list. And those are also the states where President Obama's popularity is in the 40s or even the 30s statewide. How do Democrats therefore square the circle of trying to get out their most ardent supporters, but at the same time separating themselves from the president, who is deeply unpopular, but who African Americans are very loyal to? It's a very tough
the way you do that is to say, I supported this president, I voted for this president, but these are the things I disagree with him on. That's a genuine, respectable answer. I supported him, but I disagree with him on these issues.
But the other thing you have to do is you actually have to have an agenda you are running for. I mean, yes, the president is deeply unpopular out there in the country, but what did the Democratic Party come out and say we're going to do in the final 2 terms of an Obama administration if we retain the Senate majority? Some of them are talking about the minimum wage. That's not normally enough to inspire vast amounts of the electorate to go out and do something. They're running attack campaigns against Republicans, and most of them are failing, and that's one of their problems too.
But Peggy, what are the Republicans saying? I mean, they're saying they're against Barack Obama.
I think what the Republicans have been trying to do is 2 things. One is capitalize on the anvil-like weight of the president. Do you know what I mean? He has a certain power to bring you down. The other is to figure out individually, day by day, what their issues are and hope it will coalesce into a big national issue. One thing that I find going on with the Republicans that is so interesting is the persons running for office have changed. The candidates are changing. There's a lot going on out there. Maya Love out in Utah, Elaine Stefanik up in New York. She's poised at least to be the youngest woman member of Congress. Maya Love is poised to be the first African American Republican member of Congress. You see little dots and cases of that going on all over the country. So I have a sense there's a bit of a quiet story of a Republican Party in transition that we're not fully noticing.
In transition, but I think without clear leaders, Rand Paul's probably been the one who stepped up the most and talked about broadening the base. They're going to win these midterms if they win control of the Senate without having figured out a way to appeal to African Americans or Hispanics, younger voters, female voters, because they're in states where they don't need to. They also emerge, I think, without a clear path about if they do have the majority, what is Mitch McConnell's posture towards dealing with President Obama? What mandate do they have at all on any issues? I think it's a big problem for Republicans they'll confront in January.
I think Mark is right. I think Mark is right, but I think it's only a short-term victory. So they win the midterms, and you win the battle, but you don't win the war. In the most multicultural America ever, that strategy ain't going to work forever.
Well, you can win congressional races without appealing to Hispanics, for example, because most Republicans don't have Hispanics in
That's the story of American politics now.
You cannot win, I think, the presidency.
Right. And the Republicans have this challenge ahead of them. This danger looms of becoming what Democrats were for a long time, which is they're the congressional party, and the Democrats become the presidential party. So that means that the Republicans have a bulwark in the House, and maybe they can keep the Senate 50-50. But how can they gain back the White House as long as they have these demographic challenges? So both parties have difficulties. Democrats have trouble in the House, but how do the Republicans get back the White House with a country that every day is becoming less and less white?
Let me play a clip of what Mary Landrieu, who's in that red-hot Senate race down in Louisiana, what she had to say to Chuck Todd of NBC the other day. I want to just get the panel's thoughts on this.
To be very, very honest with you, in the South has not always been the friendliest place for African Americans. It's been a difficult time for the president to present himself in a very positive light as a leader. It's not always been a good place for women to be able to present ourselves. It's more of a conservative place.
So what do you think?
State has a Democratic woman senator named Mary Landrieu and an Indian American governor. And I think that was not a tactic. I think that was fatigue and frustration that she may be losing her job.
See what?
Yeah, I
Tavis?
think there's something to that.
Mark, I take your point that politically, as George Bush would say, it wasn't good strategery, but she told the truth. And it just sickens me in this town that the truth is just so subversive that it can't be told. And when it is told, we want to call it frustration and fatigue. It may have been that, but she told the truth.
I think it was both things. It was a misstep because you can see it in the statement, Bob, that she issued subsequently. And by the way, if a candidate puts a statement out after a quote on TV, usually it wasn't intentional, clarifying what she meant to say. But look, to Tavis's point, the fact is that there's still vestiges of racial discrimination in the South. Louisiana is a state that in 1991 gave David Duke a lot of votes. That's not ancient history. So race is still a challenge in the South.
But,
Yeah, but to go to what Tavis said earlier, I mean, you were saying that it's the timing of this that was notable, right? It sounds as though she's making an appeal for my base to come out. And that gets to what you were saying earlier, which is, are you going to go to African Americans and women voters only when it really matters? And that's one of the reasons.
It's always that political Hail Mary that you want the black and brown to save the day for.
But you know, one of the undercurrents in this election, and I think one of the ugliest parts of it, there are some Democratic ads running out there suggesting that if African Americans don't vote for the Democrat, that they're going to get shot like that poor kid in Missouri.
Yeah.
It shows the extent to which mathematically Democrats have to turn out African Americans in those targeted states, and the extent to which, as has been said, they don't have much else to offer. I will say about Mary Landrieu and Michelle Nunn in Georgia, people are writing them off in runoffs because of the polls now. Those are static snapshots. I actually think if the Senate's on the line, there's a chance that Mary Landrieu and Michelle Nunn could win in the runoffs.
I agree with that in part because if those black and brown voters we've talked about see that the country is shifting in the other direction, that the Senate is turning this way, then they'll come to the rescue
motivated.
once again to be motivated.
And Bill Clinton will take up residence in
Absolutely.
both states.
Can I add, though, that I think the subtext of what we're talking about is there's a certain brain deadness that can be discerned on both parties as you look at what they stand for this year, how they've campaigned, even the artlessness of some of them. It's funny, you expect candidates for office to be very big on charm and cleverness. They're not all. But both parties have to figure out, we saw it this year more than ever, what they stand for, where they stand. You know, I'm hopeful they're evolving, but they don't look so good at the moment.
Kimberly, you've done some reporting on that race out in Colorado, which may well come down to be the deciding state. What's going on out there?
Well, I think what's interesting for Democrats out there is, remember, you got to think back to the history here. Democrats have put out Colorado as the model of how they were going to take a swing state in the country and make it permanently blue. And they had done a very good job. They poured tons of money into infrastructure out there. They had kind of honed this strategy where you go out and you attack your Republican candidates. And they'd done very well. They'd got both Senate seats, the state legislature, the governorship. That seems to all be crumbling at the moment. And I think it's partly the fact that you've had local issues that have interjected themselves. There was a gun control debate out there. There's a death penalty debate going on in the governor's race. But also I think you're seeing the failure of some of these tried and true Democratic strategies, the war on women. I mean, the fact when you get dubbed Mark Uterus by the national press, that's a real problem. And it's turned off the focus on abortion and contraception has turned off women voters who feel like they're being demeaned by not being addressed in a more fulsome way, and also male voters, which is really Mark Udall's big problem out in that race. He's losing them by double digits. They don't feel they've heard him talk about the issues that matter.
Bob, the two states that the parties care about the most for the purposes of the future are Colorado for Republicans. If they can win there, it shows it's still a purple state. It hasn't gone blue entirely, that it can be in play for 2016 for the Republicans, which is crucial for them to get 270 electoral votes. For Democrats, it's Georgia, and this is why. If Michelle Nunn wins or only narrowly loses there, it shows that Georgia has become a swing state sooner than they even thought, that in 2016 it could be competitive for Hillary Clinton. And if Democrats can make inroads into a place like Georgia, after already having done the same thing in Virginia and North Carolina, that's going to make it awfully hard for the GOP to win the White House going forward, to have that kind of vulnerability in the South.
What about these international issues, Ebola, ISIS, Will they be factors in this election?
I think they've hurt the Democrats in 3 ways. First of all, they've hurt the president's general approval rating. They've played into this Republican theme of competence and can the president's gang shoot straight. And finally, they've kept the president from talking about the economy. Day to day, the news is just dominated by Ebola, ISIS, etc. The Democrats have a story to tell on an improving economy, but voters haven't heard it, and I don't think you'll see them buying it on
But it's
election day.
sickening to see the way Ebola has become politicized as an issue. This is a life or death issue. That's back to the point you made, Peggy, the brilliant point about how brain dead the way these campaigns have been run are. And yet you see an issue like this that gets politicized in this way. It's pretty sickening to watch, Bob.
And what about this business? And now we're seeing that somehow or another, some member of the president's staff is calling the prime minister of Israel a chicken. Chicken. I mean, how does that kind of thing get out? I mean, and in an election, does that help anybody? Does that help President Obama?
I think the president has a problem with competence, coherence, and credibility as people look at the White House. Things like the chicken blank comment seem to fit into all of it. It looks like it's disorganized there in the administration. It looks like it doesn't quite work. It looks like people pop off who shouldn't be popping off. So that doesn't help either. I mean, obviously, there's been a whole cluster of these things that'll make people think, whoa, I don't like this.
But it also looks like you're saying something publicly and saying something very else privately.
I would love to continue on with it. We'll have to do it after the break.
No more Chicken Little.
Thank you all for being here today.